have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Mike Dukakis, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Nathan Hamay, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I am your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels. And may I add that we are broadcasting internationally straight from late night in the Midlands for those friends and listeners in the United Kingdom who catch the after show on Pulse or Deprogrammed. You may want to consider joining it live here since we've changed the time to make sure that you two as a group have time or break to join in on the show while it is live. Now, today we have a very special guest, and we are going to be talking about one of the biggest and most monumental conspiracies that affects not just the people living in the United States, but people globally. If you guys all recall, during the 2016 election, even going back to the end of 2015 or the summer of 2015, when Donald J. Trump announced his candidacy for president, every time we had a politician on the show, even if he was Republican or she was Republican, they said he would lose, he was a joke, etc., etc. For each politician, there was about 20 or so other guests that said he will win. Well, here we are 2 years later, and of course, what happened? We have Donald J. Trump as the 45th president of the United States. Now, those of you who have been paying attention to the news, I'm sure the word Steele dossier and Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, and Spygate have come across you in some form or fashion, whether from One American News, InfoWars, from ABC, you name it. You cannot turn on the news, the world news, and not hear about this. Well, if you want to literally get everything tied together in one perfect book that connects every dot for you, then this is the author of whose book we're going to speak about today. Now, the name of the book is Killing the Deep State. It is currently a New York Times best-selling book. Phenomenal book. And as you know, folks, I usually do not endorse books. I just allow the guests to talk about them. But this book, I definitely stand behind. It is written by a fantastic man who you are about to meet. He is currently the DC Bureau Chief for Infowars.com. That happens to be the one and only Dr. Jerome Corsi. Dr. Corsi, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Jay-Z. Thank you.
It's an actual pleasure to have you on because I'm sure you heard how much I think your book is so great. And because I think people really need to have everything intertwined and understand what everything means. So let's take the clock back to 2015. And this is well before we even know it, before a FISA court granted the FBI to spy on the Trump campaign. Let's go back to the very first time when we heard the phrase, the elections are being meddled by the Russians. Talk to us about when you started to put two and two together and realize that wasn't the case, which essentially inspired you to write this fantastic book, Killing the Deep State.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the first real hint of the Russians interfering in the election didn't occur until the Democratic National Committee emails were stolen, and they were published by WikiLeaks. And this was pretty deep into the election. This was, I think, must have been in around, September, maybe the first hints of it, August, September. I'd have to go back to my notes to see the exact date. But, the election was pretty well. This is 2016. And almost from the beginning, Hilary Clinton was saying that the Russians had hacked into her DNC computers and was blaming the Russians for this leak. John Podesta and even at that time, Eric Schmidt from Google, who was running Hillary's Get Out the Vote campaign, they brought in a company called CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike did an evaluation of the DNC server and said it was the Russians because it had these markings. The metadata was Fancy Bear or something of that nature, Cozy Bear, which were Russian markings. Now, there were always several problems with that. One is that CrowdStrike had been very heavily funded by Eric Schmidt and had a lot of the intelligence agents working for it. And we later found out from Julian Assange that the CIA could hack a computer and make it look like the Russians.
Yes.
This was about the time that Seth Rich, who had surfaced as possibly the one who stole the emails from inside, an IT worker for the Democratic National Party, and he was killed in the streets of Washington. And I believe from the beginning that it was Seth Rich who probably took the emails, and not the Russians at all. But that's when the Russians entered into the dialogue of the election, and it wasn't really until a fairly late point in the election cycle when there were only, 3 or 4 months left before the voting started, maybe even less.
And, I'm glad you brought up the fact that Seth Rich was, for one, killed. And of course, even to this day, they don't even talk about having a possible suspect because we could assume the suspects are somewhere in the DNC, either Debbie Wasserman Schultz or somebody. And on top of the fact that you mentioned the CIA hacking program that you talked about that was released in WikiLeaks, I believe the title was called Umbra. And it does exactly as you say. It's able to leave the digital fingerprint of whatever they want it to be. And back to what Hillary said, she was the first person I've ever seen to talk about Russia. Why would she know more than, say, Obama at the time? Why would she know before the CIA came forward or the FBI who was working in cahoots with her? Clearly, it sounded to me like she wanted to deflect the issue of her emails being in her state emails on her private server and immediately blame someone who she would potentially have gone to war with if she had won. Wouldn't you believe that's the case?
I think you're right. And see, as I've learned more about all of what has gone on here, and I think ultimately, we talk about this through the show, but I think Mueller is just about done, the special prosecutor, and this Russia collusion is almost over as a theme. The next theme is going to be Spygate. Now, I think the Russian theme, although it was not public, really started sometime in 2015 when British intelligence decided that they didn't want Donald Trump to win. And I think this all started in British intelligence that basically felt that Trump was for Brexit, and they did not want Trump being president of the United States because the British intelligence agencies are very much establishment, and they're very much for the New World Order EU, and Britain staying in the EU. And I think the very idea of having Russia involvement, because Donald Trump had all this business experience in Russia. He had his beauty pageant in Russia. He wanted to build a Trump Tower in Russia. And I think that the intelligence agencies were going to try to ultimately frame Donald Trump over Russian involvement and even try to brand him as a spy if he won. And this started with MI6 in 2015, who sold it to John Brennan, who was the head of the CIA.
And I'm glad you mentioned the fact that it started with MI6 because, just like you said, they want us to have a New World Order. They want the EU, of course, with the UK combined, joined in with North America, since essentially it could be argued that if it wasn't for the United States, we wouldn't be running, behind the scenes, Canada and Mexico and anything south of the border. If you have a an African Union, you pretty much could solidify having the majority of the world, at least the majority of the nations. At that point, it would be so easy to have a one world government. And just like you said, whether it be Republicans, whether it be Democrats, the establishment, Republicans and Democrats, are all seeking the same thing. And when you mentioned Donald Trump having business in Russia, let's not forget, folks, Donald Trump is truly a world-class business figure. I don't understand why people would make such a big deal that he would have business in there. I mean, you also have the Clintons tied into so many of our adversaries, but yet they don't talk about that because the mainstream news, things like CNN, or as I like to call them, the Clinton News Network, and I know Roger Stone calls them that, and Jerome Corsi, do you say that as well?
I'm more inclined to the Communist News Network.
I like that. I like that. And what's also really scary, this is just a small tangent, is we have this communist world news, but we also have now is people on the left going so far left, they actually have the nerve to call themselves socialists, American socialists. Well, when was the last time we had something socialist, a national socialist party? I mean, doesn't that just ring a bell for the Nazis, the National Socialist Party? It seems like people here sort of want a repeat of history, which is kind of sad. But nonetheless, at least we have someone in the presidency right now who's trying to drain the swamps, except for people like Robert Mueller, who want nothing more to impeach him. As your book explains, if Hillary didn't win, they wanted an insurance policy to make sure that Donald J. Trump would serve or spend as little as time as possible in the Oval Office. Now, when did you first come across the company Fusion GPS, which led to Christopher Steele of the MI6 getting paid the $50,000 to corroborate the facts, or so-called facts?
Well, it was pretty clear. I mean, through the course of the election, after WikiLeaks published all these emails, and Donald Trump did make one foolish statement. He said, well, if Russia has Hillary's 30,000 emails that she destroyed, maybe Russia, if they stole her emails, maybe they could give us those back.
Yes.
And so the Democrats immediately seized on that statement as saying, well, Donald Trump, he has conspired with Russia, and he's trying to get Russia to turn over these emails, which was, patently silly, and Donald Trump was making another off-the-cuff remark that he later regretted. But the point is that it was known before the election ended that there was this dossier. You remember in the last few weeks of the election, a couple things surfaced on Donald Trump. There was the Billy Bush tape with Donald Trump talking about years ago, talking about women in a locker room fashion. The Democrats thought that for sure was going to destroy Donald Trump. Of course, it didn't affect Donald Trump's voters hardly at all. And then we started hearing about this Russian dossier, which had information about Donald Trump with prostitutes in Moscow and their salacious activities, and Donald Trump having business dealings in Moscow that compromised him, and he was going to lift the sanctions. And when we found out what this dossier was, it was Fusion GPS, which was a opposition research company created by journalist Glenn Simpson and some other journalists in the United States to do opposition research, and which is what you do in a campaign if you want to discredit your opponent. You dig up all the dirt. And no one had seen this dossier, but it was reputed to have talked about golden showers with the prostitutes in the hotel room and all kinds of bizarre behavior. And Donald Trump was supposed to have made deals with the Russians for money and for influence, and they were going to sway the election by stealing these emails from the Democratic National Committee and giving them to WikiLeaks. So all this got kind of blended together, and that became the original basis of the Russian collusion, that Donald Trump was going to lift the sanctions, and what Russia had on him was all this compromising material, this compromat in Russian, this And that's why they were able to kind of blackmail Donald Trump. And Donald Trump said, well, I'll give you a relief of the sanctions, the Magnitsky Act, another complicated piece of legislation, but impose sanctions on Russia. I'll repeal this. This was supposedly the argument. If you, Russia, go steal the emails and give them to WikiLeaks, which will then embarrass Hillary, and she'll lose. Now, so a lot of the fallacies in that argument were, first of all, Donald Trump did not engage with prostitutes in Moscow. Donald Trump had plenty of women everywhere he wanted them, and it would take a fool to engage with prostitutes in Russia when you were a prominent business person, because you would know they were trying to blackmail you or compromise you. If you wanted prostitutes, you wouldn't do it in Russia.
That's
secondly, right. I mean, anybody with any sense would know that, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, nobody knew what these emails were until they were made public, so how would Donald Trump know that you should go steal these emails or that WikiLeaks would publish them? Because, who knew? For all intent and purposes, you would think that Hillary's emails with Podesta and internal emails within the campaign would only have shown what a stellar campaign she was running, when in fact these emails revealed that Hillary had been disliked even by her own campaign, that they had plotted to steal the primaries from Bernie Sanders, and that was what evidently upset Seth Rich, who was a young internet technology specialist who was working in the Democratic National Committee with computers, and he was evidently a Bernie Sanders enthusiast, who, when he found out that all these plottings that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Hillary had done with John Podesta, to make sure Bernie could never win, because they had these superdelegates in the Democratic Party, and Bernie would win a primary and he'd win most of the delegates in the primary, but Hillary still had more delegates coming out of the state because she won all the superdelegates. So the situation was rigged from the beginning, and they were very callous about it in these emails, almost ridiculing Bernie Sanders. And anyone who's a Bernie Sanders supporter would have been upset by this, as I think Seth Rich was. So, this whole Russian story was a cover story that Donald Trump was correct, was Hillary's excuse for losing, rather than admit that she was just a bad candidate.
Speaking of the DNC and Bernie Sanders, specifically at the convention, when Bernie Sanders gave his delegates to Hillary, the expression on his face seemed like his arm had been twisted. Obviously, he ended up campaigning for Hillary, but you knew in that moment, he almost felt as like his power, the voters or the people that were supporting him had literally been stripped away from him by those of the DNC as the internal communications show. And just as you said, this election has been rigged for the longest time. And another thing that really bothers me about this is news right now. The fact that they're talking about that if Russia, if so-called, we both know that's not true, if they did meddle with our elections during the election year of 2016, why didn't Obama do anything about it? Why blame the incoming president instead of the guy who was in charge? Unless, of course, he was part of the plan.
Well, and also, now we have Mueller, Robert Mueller, is special prosecutor, and he's launched 2 indictments against the Russians.
Yes.
80% of the people that he has indicted are Russian. And Mueller knew that none of the Russians would ever come back for trial. So he was trying to get his indictments to be equivalent to a conviction. Now, Rod Rosenstein, number 2 in the Justice Department, when he announced these indictments, and I think Rosenstein is also a deep state actor,
yes,
he was forced to admit that these Russian conspiracies that Mueller was indicting did not affect the outcome of the election and were not involved in any conspiracy with U.S. citizens. And in fact, in the first indictment, Mueller indicted a Russian corporation that did not exist At the time, it was supposed to have interfered in the election by posting on social media. And one of the Russian companies indicted did hire a lawyer. Mueller was hugely surprised, embarrassed. And when they had discovery in the case, it turned out that what the FBI had was most of the evidence of this Russian collusion in Russian. Well, posting in Russian on social media was not going to affect any American voters because most of us don't read Russian. I don't. I mean, I don't know very many people who do. And the whole transparent nature of this Russian argument, I think, has failed massively. And Donald Trump's also right in that the evidence does point very strongly to the fact that Hilary Clinton and Podesta were in Russia making massive amounts of money, selling military technology under U.S. highly classified military technology to Russia under the reset and making money for it personally. I consider treason. And that further, Obama had put an ambassador in Russia named McFaul, who prior to the 2012 Russian election met with the opposition groups to Putin and did everything he could to interfere in Russia's presidential election. So, if there were going to be real arguments or serious investigations of Russian collusion, they would have to involve the Democrats.
Yes.
And Donald Trump, I think, has gotten to the point where the American people understand that, for instance, in this indictment and trial going on of his campaign manager, Donald Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, there's nothing about Russia at all in the trial. It has to do with business transactions with Manafort in the Ukraine, going back to 2004 through the period of about 2012, but ended well before Manafort was Trump's campaign manager. So it looks to me like Mueller has zero, Zipola, on Russia that he can pin on Donald Trump.
And on top of that, with regards to Manafort, not only are we going back so far in time, one would have to even beg the question of the statute of limitations, which clearly they must still fit if this case is able to be prosecuted. But Mueller has so many conflicts of interest. I still don't understand why he's not recusing himself, other than the fact that he is an establishment politician who wants nothing more than to get rid of a president who's anti-establishment. And going back to what you were talking about with Rosenstein being the deputy underneath Sessions, and you also have the history of Trump getting rid of anybody who wasn't doing their job. I would have hoped when Sessions recused himself and allowed Rosenstein, his deputy, to appoint a special prosecutor as Mueller, to maybe have worked for Trump. I mean, if Trump appointed Sessions as the attorney general, instead of having Sessions have a new deputy inspector general, then I would think there would be somebody else that he could have put in that would have appointed, say, a non-biased special prosecutor, if that even exists in the DC culture today. And so there's just so many little things that just by looking at the face, you would think that Mueller shouldn't be doing this, can't be doing this, is too biased to be doing this. Yet he seems to be getting away with a knife dripping blood anywhere he goes, and it's just being shown, and yet all the negative press is on the president.
Well, certainly the mainstream media is carrying the narrative against the president, and the mainstream media is rapidly becoming dismissed in the eyes of the American public as a biased, corporate, CIA-influenced media that's not trusted at all. I mean, we're down to the New York Times hiring its new editors, an Asian woman who has a history of tweets in which she hates white people.
Yes.
If that's going to be the nature of the New York Times, you got 10 people in Greenwich Village that might really be interested in reading it, and the only other reason to buy a New York Times is for fish wrap.
Yeah.
Or maybe you got a bird. I don't know. Maybe there'd be a reason to buy it if you had a bird. But my point is, if you're not looking to line the bottom of the cage with paper, the New York Times is publishing ideologically laden claptrap. So what's happening right now is that the American people are turning it off. And Mueller has, if he loses the Manafort conviction, if Manafort is not convicted, and this Manafort trial is just about to get interesting because Manafort wants to call Rosenstein as a witness. Now, Rosenstein was in the IRS as an attorney when Lois Lerner was making sure that Tea Party groups did not get 501c3 and 501c4 status. And Manafort's case came before Mueller, and Rosenstein in the IRS. And Rosenstein declined to prosecute because he realized too many Democrats were implicated. Tony Podesta was working on contracts with Manafort in Ukraine. There were other Democratic operatives involved, and they couldn't sort it out without doing damage to the Democratic Party. So 8 years ago, on these same issues, Manafort was given a pass by Rosenstein, who now is in charge of the special prosecutor, as allowing Mueller to go after criminal convictions of Manafort for these same issues. Now, the judge is not going to be real happy when all this gets exposed to the court. The judge may very well dismiss this case as not having been proven or prejudicial in terms of the prosecutor. And Mueller's cases all are hanging by a thread. As I say, these Russians, at least in one case, the Russian trolls are going to contest the case. And I don't think Mueller has a case because he can't prove that these Russians did anything that affected the election. So after all this time, Mueller's coming up empty. And the American people are seeing that.
And they really are. And as everybody knows, if they're paying attention to not just the news, but Donald Trump's Twitter page, he's always mentioning the fact that this is a rigged witch hunt. One thing that I would think bothers a lot of people, because it's been bothering me for a heck of a long time, is instead of focusing on what could be happening or the president's approval rating or our economy or fixing trades, lowering the unemployment rate, we are still talking about something that allegedly occurred 2 years ago. Can you imagine if we had the entire first term of the president until the time he was announcing, or not announcing that he was running for a re-election, but by the time he was re-elected president, that Mueller would still be talking about this meddling? It's at what point people clearly are getting fed up. And I'm glad you wrote this book. And part of the reason it's a New York Times bestseller is because so many people are fed up with what's going on. And I would think that there'd be enough pressure from the public to stop Mueller. But yet all we have is delayed promise after promise after promise that he's going to submit his findings and end it. The current promise is that by September 2018, that Mueller will close the so-called investigation, end it, and submit his findings, assuming he gets a promise from our president that both he answers the written questions and is interviewed. To me, it sounds like they still don't have anything, like you mentioned, but if you have the opportunity to interview the president in person, despite him having Rudolph Giuliani and 3 other Republican attorneys that have come forward saying they'll defend him, I have a feeling that Mueller is going to do anything he can to entrap him. Don't you see something like this fishy coming around the corner with Mueller?
I don't think that President Trump will submit to an interview under oath with Mueller and the special prosecutors because there's nothing to be gained by it. They'll just simply try to create a perjury trap where he says something that can be used as a perjury statement that wasn't precisely stated right or wasn't quite accurate. and the prosecutors are good at this. And right now, Donald Trump does not need to. He's not the subject or target of any part of this investigation. And I think the constitutional law is on President Trump's side, refusing even to comply with the subpoena. And most constitutional authorities seem to be in the same mind. And especially with Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, I don't think that they're going to get through anything from the Supreme Court that would force Donald Trump to give testimony. And once the Supreme Court rules, I think Mueller's finished.
I definitely agree. And speaking of the Supreme Court, I would hope that Kavanaugh at least is given a fair chance to have his hearings and to become part of the Supreme Court before it's too late and you end up with 4 on each side, essentially splitting down the vote and waiting for another justice to come on to have a majority. And I'm sure you've seen the news lately where you had 74 people arrested for blocking Senate offices to prevent Kavanaugh from being interviewed. I just thought, what a low point is really going on. I mean, are people literally trying to hope that they could somehow impeach the president and somehow insert Hilary Clinton at this point? I just don't see what sort of end goal anybody can look at that would work to their favor aside from causing anarchy and here's another point which I know you would agree on, and because this is a well-known stated fact, the more negative press there is on President 45, Mr. Trump, you have his base of supporters skyrocketing in his support, skyrocketing in anger every time the left or the mainstream says something negative about him. So I don't know why people like in the New York Times or Chicago Tribune or the Post haven't learned to wise up to the fact that if I say this and continually beat this idea down people's throats, they're going to come after me at some point. What do you have to say about that? The fact that you have almost all of Trump supporters getting more angry and supporting him more the more they talk negatively about him.
I think it's absolutely true. And you look, the left is now, I think, gotten a panic. I mean, they've gone insane. Antifa is increasingly in the streets beating people up. The thuggery confronting people like this Candace Owens in a coffee shop and with a bullhorn in her face. I mean, these tactics are not what Americans want from their politics. And the left, I think the hard left, which has taken over the Democratic Party, I say it's now become a communist party. The American people are not in favor of this. They can't get in their minds that Donald Trump is, they think that they can get rid of Donald Trump. And they want to act as if Donald Trump isn't president today, because in their minds he's not legitimate. So they're not going to accept him, and they're going to act as if they can do it. They can delegitimate him, including censoring everybody on the internet, like they've just censored Alex Jones. Now, the social media wasn't even trying to hide it. I mean, they're obviously abandoning any claim that they have to follow the First Amendment. They're saying we're private companies. Of course, the New York Times is a private company. It has to follow the First Amendment too. But these people, Zuckerberg and Larry Ellison, who really is the godfather of the internet out in Silicon Valley, think that they're above all this, and they are not going to comply with the First Amendment. Now, that's not going to go down well with the American people. They've just made Alex Jones 10 times more popular than he was to start with. And they've made, the Democrats think that they're going to run on this platform that we're going to come to an intolerant, no First Amendment, and you're engaging in hate speech. It certainly sounds to me like a Maoist cultural revolution. It's like a Silicon Valley version of Mao's cultural revolution. And I don't see the American people voting for it.
Neither do I. And I'm glad you brought up Alex Jones, because this is something that is very important for everybody. You have the First Amendment being attacked. Clearly, we have the Second Amendment as well, and the Fourth Amendment through FISA courts. So, speaking with regards to the First Amendment, right before Alex Jones was censored, and like you said, made him that much more popular, I had 2 videos on my YouTube channel that were all of a sudden deemed inappropriate for monetization. And I was kind of shocked because one of them is what I first read in your book was the leaked video of Hilary Clinton celebrating on election night. I mean, how can that be deemed inappropriate? And then I also have a 2-hour interview at length with a neurosurgeon talking about the illnesses that Hilary Clinton was going through in 2016. Yet both of those were deemed unfit for YouTube. And then you have all of Alex Jones being removed. I mean, is this just going to continue where you're censored and anybody that's on the right censored at some point? So we live, like you said, in this communist socialist nation, and all the networks, aside from the mainstream, which are already one-sided, is going to trickle down to affect the independent networks, such as ours or the ones we work with in the UK.
Well, I've created a new website called CorsiNation.com. And I'm doing live streams every day at about 5 o'clock, and we're building out a very robust, it's going to be dedicated to citizen journalism. We're going to get citizens to be journalists and be able to submit articles and write content and publish books. And what I'm pointing out is that, first of all, the Silicon Valley has decided that the godlessness, their Luciferian nature, and what we're finding out about the pedophilia and all these other issues, which seem to be rampant in Hollywood and in Silicon Valley, etc. Godlessness. They think they don't need a First Amendment. And they think that they're going to be able to get away with this. Well, I think this is a huge, huge miscalculation. And that it's going to be the end of not only Facebook and Twitter and Google, all of which could go away, but Silicon Valley itself. In other words, Larry Ellison better start thinking about having antitrust action to break up Oracle. Oracle's an old company. We don't need it. We can run the internet without Oracle. Or he could be unplugged tomorrow. And they've also, Jeff Bezos might want to call up Zuckerberg and say thanks a lot. My Washington Post is now going to be having to be registered as a lobbyist. And by the way, the FTC just filed 25 antitrust actions on me to break up Amazon. Jeez. And the FEC, now we've got attorneys who are saying that they're on behalf of the congressmen who have been shadow banned by Twitter and the like. They're going to file complaints in the FEC, Federal Election Commission, for violating with their re-election chances. And when some of these congressmen lose, I wouldn't be surprised to see criminal voter interference charges filed with the FEC or directly with the federal courts, and say nothing about, sign me up for one of the class action suits. We ought to be able to get class action suits here with millions of people worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And I want to see what Larry Ellsworth, Ellison's net worth is, or Zuckerberg's. His stock's already tanked 20%. Let's see it go down 40%.
Yeah.
Let's see it go down 80%. And let's see if the lawyers can't get in there first to grab the hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, this has opened up a can of worms where they think that now, they've just declared they're the ones who can tell what's hate. Of course, this is a case some lawyers got to love to have. They're going to say, Mr. Zuckerberg, why is it that the ISIS can be, a declared terrorist group is allowed to post on Facebook, and Alex Jones can't? You say Alex Jones is hate. Well, what is ISIS?
That's right.
You could determine who is hate. Well, you may not like Alex Jones. You may feel warm and fuzzy about ISIS because they hate the United States as much as you apparently do. But does that appoint you to be the final arbiter of what's hate speech. This whole hate speech is just another attempt to declare Hillary Clinton's deplorables as guilty of hate crimes, so when the Silicon Valley Cultural Revolution, Maoist style, can be conducted, Alex not only gets off the internet, his business gets shut down, he gets put in a thought reform prison.
Wow. And I'm glad you brought up the term deplorables. When Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters the basket of deplorables, I couldn't imagine. I wish there was that leaked video of her, clearly, that we just talked about, of election night, where Bill Clinton is jumping up and down like a little schoolgirl almost. But I wish you could see a few hours later, when it finally kicked into Hillary, wow, these deplorables are far outweigh the Democrats, the so-called Democrats, who I was such a shoo-in to win. And then you also have the fact that on election night, Hillary never came out to give a concession speech, and by her own words, she says the reason she didn't is because she didn't have one prepared. That shows me not confidence, that she really had the election rigged, all the way from Obama to the DOJ to FBI to MI6 and everybody in between. And that's why when I said at the beginning of the show that we are talking about one of the biggest and most monumental conspiracies to affect American people on such a macro level, that it's shocking. It's shocking. So you have words like deplorable coming out of Hillary Clinton, and yet it's said once and then it's not really repeated. But then you have, say, for instance, Donald Trump, when he meets Putin, telling the media that he agreed with Putin, that Putin didn't meddle with the elections. And then you have a firestorm of people saying, oh, our own president doesn't trust our intelligence agencies. Another piece of fake news. It just goes on every day. I'm sure everybody out there listening can watch a 30-minute segment of news and take away something that is clearly fake in front of you. Here's an example. Dr. Corsi, let me know if you saw this one. Just a couple days ago on ABC, which I'm sure was on every other channel, during their world news segment, they advertised when they were coming back from break that Ivanka Trump spills her beans or talks about the infamous meeting at Trump Tower with the Russian attorneys. So the interviewer says to Ivanka, one, were you aware of the meeting with the Russian attorney at Trump Tower before it happened? And two, were you aware that your husband and your brother were part of that meeting? Her answer was no and no. If her answer was no, how does that translate into Ivanka Trump answers questions or talks about the infamous Trump meeting? And that's just one of such a small piece of the pie of fake news that I wonder, are people taking everything at face value, or do you think people are starting to wake up and realize that we're living in a propaganda-filled world?
I think people are getting it. I mean, look, Hillary was such a horrible candidate.
Yeah.
She lost a rigged election.
Yes.
Like you pointed out, she lost a rigged election. And that's I think what people see. I have to get a drink of water here.
No problem.
But what you see is that Hillary, I think, is desperate, and the Democrats are desperate because Americans are catching on, and they never calculated that Americans would catch on. But the American people are not stupid, and they're seeing through all of this. They're seeing, okay, they'll give Mueller the benefit of the doubt, but when Mueller goes almost, over a year, and he has nothing of any value to prove his original premise, the American people say, we're tired of this. You had enough time, you did nothing. And the mainstream media is only fooling themselves. The same way that social media are fooling themselves to think that the censorship is what Americans want. Because if Alex Jones can be censored, then anybody else can be censored. And if Hillary's voters are deplorable, then they're all committing hate crimes, and their votes can be invalidated. And the American people are realizing that in a communist system, nothing's fair, and the media are all lying to you. Now, again, I don't think it's ever been as severe as this in American history, and possibly like books like mine, The Killing of the Deep State, have exposed it enough that people are seeing it. But once Mueller resigns, and he's going to be given a choice, he's going to be saying, either you continue with this, you can be part of the treason.
Yes.
Or quit it now. And Mueller could easily be implicated in about the Uranium One fraud, the HSBC bank fraud. There's any number he can be implicated in. And the point is that Donald Trump, I say in my book, Donald Trump will begin a counterattack. And he'll fire Rosenstein, he'll fire Sessions, and there's enough evidence now in Inspector General Horowitz's reports to understand this was a treasonous conspiracy. And I think it'll take the rest of Donald Trump's first term to bring these people to justice. But he will do it. And then I say at the beginning of the second term, I can see Donald Trump having military tribunals and trying people, including Hilary Clinton and Barack Obama, for treason. And if Mueller doesn't watch out, his name will be added to the list.
And this is what I am hoping, especially reading through your book, is the final outcome, that you have everybody from Hillary, Bill, Obama, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Loretta Lynch, Page, Strzok, Mueller, Rosenstein, Christopher Steele, and everybody in between in one fell swoop, all be arrested in a day that's literally a surprise to us and face trial. But the other part of me is also scared that you have people like Hillary being so protected from all those special interest groups that have paid her so much money throughout the years that she may be able to wiggle away. For instance, you got her husband, Bill. He's known to be a sexual assaulter. I mean, this is no question. People don't think this is just a conspiracy. There are at least 27 known women who have come forward and spoken about the fact that they have either been raped by Bill Clinton, either when he was the governor of Arkansas, or the president of the United States, before, during, or after. You also have just the straight sexual assault, which is, again, against their will. But yet, aside from being impeached, which really did nothing for him, losing his Arkansas bar license, paying an $850,000 fine, he still got to do whatever the heck he wanted to do. So why would he be such in protected state? Why is there something we can hope our president can do that can actually have these indictments and arrests come to fruition?
I think Donald Trump will do it. I think maybe Donald Trump uniquely will do it. But I think Donald Trump understands the situation. And this is not, he doesn't have to do this job. I think he feels a higher calling, as he said in several speeches, including during the campaign, that he knows how deep this corruption is, and he's resolved to fight it. And what's going to be the massive corruption that we're dealing with here in terms of this New World Order crowd that, as far as I'm concerned, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were spreading chaos with the Arab Spring, with Muslim Brotherhood. They were not stopping either North Korea or Iran on the way to nuclear weapons. Their future was going to be a world of chaos. It's going to be a world of future, a world that we'd have to increasingly take serious the possibility of a nuclear war. And Donald Trump, within a matter of less than 2 years, has come in and reversed much of this. He's also going to he's going to go after this corruption. It's within the Department of Justice. People have already been identified, many of them. Strzok, Page, the list goes on. And Trump's not about to forget who these people are. Now, when you get to a final stage of Donald Trump realizing that he is no longer under threat of being impeached and the special prosecutor is gone, the tables are going to turn pretty fast. And all of these communists who think that they're going to get a free ride, well, Hillary is like all the other communists. Everybody's in poverty except for her. Everybody's income gets redistributed except for hers. The day of this is coming to an end because I see this as a spiritual battle. I see this is really, that's why I created CorsiNation.com. And I think it's almost a miracle that Donald Trump did get elected. I see that people prayed and people were, asking God for forgiveness. And I think finally realizing that if Hillary won, it was going to be the end of the United States as we knew it. And the actions that you see the social media giants taking today confirm that this is what they always intended to do. Now they're trying to do it anyway, thinking that they've got Donald Trump cornered, but they don't have anybody cornered except for themselves. They just made one of the most classic and I think colossal errors in history, in corporate history, by trying to throw Alex Jones off of the internet. What they've done is that they've now exposed themselves to be absolutely opposed to the fundamental American freedoms. And when the American people really understand what that means, I think Amazon.com, I think Larry Ellison and Oracle, Cisco Systems, all these giants who think that they are can't be touched because they're running the internet. They haven't met Donald Trump. They haven't met the blockchain. They haven't realized that they can be repositioned and replaced in 20 minutes by newer, better technology with people who are less corrupt, less evil, less greedy, and a much more democratic structure to the entire process. I don't think the American people realize that every time they put a picture on Facebook, it's getting recorded by Zuckerberg did not create Facebook. It was given to him by the CIA, handed to him a silver platter. He may have been, the stupid college kid that had done some little joke sophomore-ish book where you could rate on the girls. But all the movie and everything else, the story about Zuckerberg, is all fiction. And the NSA just figured in the CIA that they could use a guy like Zuckerberg, dumb enough to front for them and think he was a genius, when in fact they just created a data collection system where people would volunteer all the data they couldn't otherwise get from them.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is such a key thing that most people just don't assume. We all know after Edward Snowden went to Hong Kong after leaving his posts at this private corporation, which I don't recall that did contract work for the CIA, NSA, that we are being surveilled all the time. But the key word that you mentioned with Facebook is people voluntarily putting their information, voluntarily turning on location services, making it so that anytime throughout the day, the CIA, NSA, DIA can just look and say, okay, this person knows this person who knows this person. And by the way, they all hang out at this bar every Thursday night. They go to this church or this mosque on so-and-so days of the month. It's just all there for the taking. And even Zuckerberg was quoted in 2004, I believe, which has recently resurfaced, where he says people are dumb Fs for posting private information. And so now he's trying to defend that 13, 14 years later, but really it just shows the true colors of the agency's mission of data collection. Now, going back real quick to what happened to Alex Jones, clearly people like me and the rest of the network and the networks I work with have to worry about the fact that things are being censored. But like you said, Alex Jones was made 10 times bigger. There's another so-called group that I would rather go into length after the break, but Q. People wearing Q shirts, QAnon posters and signs at a Trump rally in Florida. And yet the next day, it was in all sorts of mainstream news. What the people are so-called calling is a fringe conspiracy theory group now just became front page news. So by trying to discredit or censor Alex Jones, all they did is make him more of a household name. Wouldn't you agree that it just backfired on them? Or do you think that this may have been some sort of plan?
No, absolutely, it backfired on them. Same with QAnon. I mean, I've had my reservations about QAnon, and at the same time, I embrace the QAnon movement because the people who are believing in Q and following it are doing excellent research. And this is clearly an internet phenomenon, and it can't be dismissed. I say rather than, trash Q, which seems to me that the next group of people who are going to be thrown off of Twitter and everything else are anyone who believes in Q, or maybe anybody who, doesn't believe in the left's ideology of climate change, which, by the way, they used to call global warming.
Yeah.
So they couldn't prove that hypothesis. It's all ideologically driven with the left. And, what they've done, the left has done, to all but a few who are fringe enough to not think deeply about these issues, is to expose themselves as being not wanting to debate the issues out, not wanting to have rational discussion on them, not wanting to, they want control. They want Antifa. They want to beat your head if you don't agree with them. They want to have a college where no conservatives allowed to speak, as we're defined as hate speakers, but they'll welcome in a terrorist.
Yes.
They'll welcome in somebody who hates America. And
socialists
for the average
too.
person, and this is not the country we want to live in. This is not, I think, the average person. When you think about this, look, many people started out as Democrats. My father was a labor union, railroad trainman, brotherhood, and he was a Democrat, John Kennedy's era. But John Kennedy, as a Democrat, bore no resemblance to Elizabeth Warren or Hilary Clinton. These are Saul Alinsky types. These are people who live and breathe for the creation of a communist state. And my father was no communist, nor would he allow or accept a Democratic Party that had a secret agenda to impose a communist system upon the rest of America. Once that's fully exposed and understood, the Democrats have moved so far to the left that they become a fringe group. And the way they're treating the press, the way they're treating the intelligence agencies, all this is going to collapse. Because, and again, Donald Trump has been a major catalyst in this happening. Donald Trump has basically pointed out to the rest of the world that these international trade agreements are for nobody's benefit except for the top that expect that they're going to be in their bunkers during the nuclear war and won't get harmed. Make all the money taking it from everybody else while we all are just useless serfs to them. And I don't think that the Democrats are prepared for the shock that not only did they lose a rigged election with Hilary Clinton, but that may have been the best they're going to do in the rest of their careers. I mean, what we're experiencing right now is the end of the Democratic Party and the death of the entire first generation of the Internet, in which Facebook will be a question on somebody's high school exam 15 years from now that some kid will be forced to remember, the same way that, list the presidents or tell me what's in the First Amendment article or clause by clause. They're not capable of doing it anymore.
That's right.
So this is the death. This is the death of the first generation. Facebook is gone. Twitter is gone. What Larry Ellison doesn't realize is Oracle's gone, and so is Cisco and all the rest of them. This whole old architecture and infrastructure of the internet is obsolete. And that's why I created CorsiNation.com, because I'm going to be in line with the entire blockchain structuring, which is much more ground floor up, which is the future. And we won't be able to have these lying dictatorships and, communists with all their... I mean, Democrats, if communism had worked, it would have worked in 1917.
Correct.
The Democrats from 1917 till the fall of the wall were in love with Soviet Russia. As soon as Russia was not communist anymore, to the Democrats it became the boogeyman.
I'm glad you brought that up. Let me just say a couple points. We'll take a quick break, and then I definitely want to go into more about Corsi Nation and Q. Communism. A good friend of mine who grew up in the Soviet Union, who came here in the mid-'80s, basically said, when I asked him, what do you think of communism? Obviously, nobody liked it if they had to leave a communist state, but he said, communism is the best idea on paper. On paper, it sounds like a good plan. Everybody benefits, but implementing it is the worst thing in the world. Who wants to live in a police state where a medical doctor will earn the same as somebody who, say, is a garbage man? I mean, that's just one little tiny thing that my friend had given me, but again, it just goes to show that why people were so unhappy. That's just one reason. One other quick thing I want to talk about is the double standard. Maxine Waters, thankfully I'm not in her district, but she's close enough to where if I just took a 20-minute drive, I could be at her office. She advocates for hate speech. She advocates for inciting riots and, in legal terms, fighting words. And by that alone, by her telling her supporters and the so-called Democrats who aren't even using democracy anymore. I don't even know why they call themselves Democrats. But if she's going around and saying anybody who supports President Trump or is Republican and not Democrat, don't let them sleep. Don't let them eat in peace. Heckle them as loud as possible. If any of us had said that to do it to anybody else, the first thing that would happen is we'd have cuffs slapped on us. We'd be thrown in the back of a police car, driven to the police station. And to witness this is happening by somebody on the left and have no consequences is a very, very sad day indeed. Dr. Corsi, before we take a quick break, and when we get back, we're definitely going deeper in Corsi Nation and a few other things. Do you have any comments on low IQ Maxine Waters?
Oh, well, I think she is a disgrace. And the Democrats have embraced her as their new face and image. Just shows, I think, how dramatically out of touch they're over the cliff. This whole group has gone over the cliff. And they're not going to realize it until they suffer a very hard landing. And that's coming.
Agreed.
Coming again in the midterm elections.
That's right. The Zip app, I don't know if people are paying attention to the Zip app. It's a nice little app that allows you to have a poll. It was the only poll that predicted Donald Trump would win in February of 2016, several months before the election. Preparing for this interview, I've run a few questions on the Zip app, and I got 96% of the people, and there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle there, 96% of people say that Republicans will not only keep the majority in the House and Senate, but there won't be a blue wave, and there will indeed be a larger red wave. So with that being said, everybody, hang tight for this quick short break. Get some water, do what you need to do. We got 3.5 minutes. We'll come back, more on Dr. Corsi, and of course we'll talk about his other books of where you can get them, and we're going to go deeper into killing the deep state. This is Dr. J, everybody. Hang tight. We'll be right back.
And said, if you do the same thing tomorrow as you did today, you're going to get the same tomorrow as you got today. Changing the world starts with you, and changing you starts with changing the way you think. Late Night in the Midlands can help. Listen to all of our shows at latenightinthemidlands.com because things really do need to change.
You can listen to the LNM Radio Network 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the Paranormal Radio app. Available from lnmradionetwork.com or TalkStreamLive.com on both Android and Apple. Our call to listen line is open 24/7. Dial 701-719-9704 so you can listen on the go.
The L&M Radio Network and Late Night in the Midlands depends on you, the listener. Without you, there would be no us. So help us continue to bring you the best guests with the best information and subscribe today. Information on becoming an L&M subscriber can be found at the top of latenightinthemidlands.com. Just click the About Subscriptions tab and become part of the family while helping the truth stay alive. And while you're at it, maybe subscriptions aren't for you. A one-time donation helps as well. Click that donate button on the right side of latenightinthemidlands.com and help us help you.
To hide the truth once you know it makes you think that you are better than everyone else. It makes you into the type of person who says, "Ooh, I have a secret," but you're not ready to hear it yet. However, for $39.95, I'll let you in on the secret. You'll lead the people to the promised land for the cheap price of 3 easy payments of 1/3 of their soul apiece.
All right, welcome back to Hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, not just to America, but to the entire world. Here's a little quick trivia fact that most of you are probably not aware of. Did you know that 8% of listeners of the show come from one country, and that happens to be Germany? More than 60% of the listeners are not even Americans, yet they all care about what's happening in this country. And believe me, when Trump was running for president, I don't think I've ever seen so many people outside the U.S. caring so much about what was happening to our elections. As you've been paying attention, we've been speaking to a very important guest, and a fantastic guest at that, someone who is very well educated and really pays attention to what is going on and has done everything to compile all the facts of this monumental conspiracy that began with the Democrats and is now linking 2 countries and their respective intelligence agencies, all against one person, President Donald J. Trump, and even his extended family. It's like, when are they going to stop? When are we going to start talking about matters that mean something to us? When are we going to start seeing people hang? But nonetheless, we've been speaking with Dr. Corsi, as I said, the author of New York Times bestseller, Killing the Deep State. He is also an author for over 20 books, 6 of them which were in the New York Times best-selling list. Dr. Corsi, let's talk about your other books real quick before we return to that, and CorsiNation.com.
Well, CorsiNation.com I really created because I wanted to bring in this citizen journalism. That right now we have a corporate journalism. We sit in front of the television used to be, now maybe live stream or whatever, and listen to these talking heads telling us what the corporately approved news is, and only the topics that they want covered, only the topics that they feel are appropriate to cover are covered. So what I'm saying is that if we get citizen journalists out there who are reporting, for instance, let me give you an example. I'm anticipating we'll have the this green revolution again in the streets in Iran once the sanctions hit. Well, I want them to be able to post from Iran the videos of what's going on in the streets. I want commentary. I want it to be directly reported from Iran. And that's citizen journalism at its best. I mean, there you're seeing it. You're not getting it filtered through some, European Union filter that doesn't want you to know anything about it, or through some, Washington Post, New York Times, hard left editor that doesn't want you to know anything about it because the radical Islamic terrorist mullahs are being threatened. They don't want that. I mean, this is the issue where citizen journalism is the future, and it's going to defeat all of this top-down control, whether it's Facebook or whether it's MSNBC or whether it's the New York Times.
And I believe Donald Trump when he said at the end of his second term, we may not even have a New York Times, because if they're going to continue to have so much bias, censored news, racist comments, and they are making a killing about about him every day, I just can see these institutions collapsing. And the best thing I like about CorsiNation.com and having the citizens do the journalism is you're not going to have the censorship, as you said. You're not going to have somebody up top says, we don't want this to happen, or don't talk about this, don't use this word. And if you use this word, make sure you say it in a negative tone. Once that's removed and there's a direct channel from what's happening around the world, from the people living in those areas or traveling to those places, giving you the news to post directly as they experience it, unfiltered, uncensored, and just put out to the public, you're going to see a large rise of people wanting to be a part of this citizen journalism. I truly believe you're going to have an influx of people who want to join to be reporters of the truth. I honestly believe so,
right.
Dr. Corsi.
Or even to give their opinions on it, to be able to have their voice heard, to participate in this discussion. I mean, you see some of what I can envision in the future in the parts of the internet that are the 8chan or the Reddit, these boards, which really do get very, very deeply committed and involved, and often very good research. And that's part of the QAnon phenomenon is, I've decided that, QAnon, I don't know who QAnon really is. I think the QAnon identity may have changed. I've decided it doesn't matter, that the phenomenon is what matters, and that, what we need to do is, as supporters of Donald Trump, come together. Now, I've started to do some commentary. I've moved from, for instance, Twitter, where I'm still posting, but to Gab, Gab.ai, where I can post, instead of 144 characters, I can post 2,500. I can really explain things, and I can have a subscription. Now, the subscriptions cost $1 a month. I mean, I put it at the lowest possible level. But, then I can have premium content that I don't expect to just be spread all over the internet. And it's that, those who really want to get deeper into the subject will be happy to pay $1 a month to get deeper into the subject. This is the future, and a future where, you don't have to worry that some Zuckerberg. I mean, who's Zuckerberg? I mean, Zuckerberg even looks like a weird guy, weird duck.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Zuckerberg tell me what I'm permitted to think or not think? I don't think so.
Or ABC, or CNN.
Or any of them.
Yeah.
And this is why Corsi Nation is founded, so that I'm saying to people around the world, there's some standards. I don't want it to be, I don't want pornography. I don't want vile language. I want, people to be gentlemanly and ladylike. But I'm not going to say these ideas are out of bounds. You're not permitted to debate these ideas, or, there's going to be robust discussion of issues and presentation of the news, so that the better ideas should win the debate, and it should be open to continual revolutionary or different thinking, reinterpretation. They climate changers. They say, well, that's settled science. Well, there's no settled science. Science, by its very nature, is built on hypotheses that are advanced to be disproven. And the nature of the scientific method, it assumes that what we know today may be supplanted by superior knowledge tomorrow. That's what I'm saying happened in the last couple of days, where the internet doomed itself. This current internet, this was the death of the Generation 1 social media, occurred yesterday when Alex Jones was censored. Because from here on, if the internet, social media are going to be an NSA controlled, we want to gather your data and you don't have any control over your life or your data, we'll tell you what to think. Who needs it?
Now, here's the sad part about Alex Jones. Do you know the reasons why they booted him off of YouTube and other parts of the net that were not just his business, but his own views, which years ago, it seemed to be more acceptable to talk about conspiracy theories and anything else. And there's the key word, is conspiracy theory versus conspiracy. We're not talking about a theory when we're talking about Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Comey. That is a bona fide conspiracy that was meant to have an insurance policy against Trump should he miraculously win the election, which is what happened. But what were the exact reasons why InfoWars was booted off YouTube? What did they give them?
They're very specific. They say, that Alex Jones raised questions about Sandy Hook. That Alex Jones, whatever he did, whatever the issues he raised, he breached into territory that the CIA-controlled corporate media had ruled off bounds, because they're so dangerous to the authority or the false pretense of the CIA and the corporate media. They don't want anybody questioning it. So Alex dared question what they don't want questioned. That's why Alex got thrown off.
This is the part that
Alex
scares me, though, is we talk about the same topics. When Alex Jones was doing a show, we would have very similar guests talking about the same thing. So if he's censored, the reason why I keep bringing that up is I got to tell you, Doc, I am scared myself. And I'm sure every independent host out there who is a perpetuator of the truth is also scared for the fact that they, too, will be censored.
Well, see, that's where I'm saying, and I created Corsi Nation, don't be scared. There's alternatives.
Yes.
The Thomas Paine had a pseudonym and a printing press, and with common sense, he helped create the Revolutionary War. Jesus Christ he had 12 people who listened to him, his disciples. He never wrote a book, never had a recorded interview, he never had television, he didn't have the internet. He changed the world.
That's right.
This is the perspective people have to have in their minds, is that this is the death of the first generation of internet. You got to look at all these people as old. All these people are outmoded. They're so scared that they're now engaging in censorship because they've lost control. And they've lost control to this is all top down. This is all control. This is all Mother May I. If, Larry Ellison and his Luciferian God throne in Silicon Valley doesn't like what you're doing, he's going to unplug you and you won't get any more goodies. Well, who cares about Larry Ellison? We're going to break up Oracle into 1,000 pieces. Antitrust action. Then where's Larry Ellison? We're going to put him in about 10 different suits for criminal activity. Then where's Larry Ellison?
Buried.
These guys who think that they are gods don't understand that they too die and face Judgment Day at the end of the line with Jesus Christ standing in front of them saying, "What did you do with your life?" Well, I killed a few babies. We ate a few babies. We worship Lucifer. We created the internet. We censored anybody who believed in the First Amendment. Now, where's that going to get them ultimately? In the end, God wins.
It's true.
And,
that is true.
This first generation of the internet, I can't wait till it's gone. It's boring. Twitter, you can have 144 characters. Boring.
And it's moving away, as you mentioned, and as we talked about throughout the show. The people who support Trump get more mad and support him more the more of the negative press there is. So, like you said, as soon as this generation of people are gone and more opportunities open up, for instance, like Corsi Nation, then people, like you said, will become journalists themselves, bypass all those heads who are doing the censoring, put the truth out there in so many different places. It would be impossible to censor it unless you literally shut down the internet permanently or shut down ways of ideas getting to places. And I don't think that anybody has such capability on such a macro level. Let's just say the CIA or NSA did have a way to stop the internet, which I'm sure they do. Well, that's not going to stop postcards from being printed and sent, flyers or events or other things like that from people speaking about the truth. But also, let me say this about the current generation. I just learned of a very, very startling fact that the socialist groups within colleges have gone up 280% from this time 2 years ago. That is a staggering number. For instance, you have in the New York District 14, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a 28-year-old who beat an incumbent Joe Crowley of 10 years, I believe he's been there. And she's running on the socialist platform, wants $30-some trillion for Medicare for all and things like that. Whereas opposed to the other side, the right is saying, instead of having the government just give you ABC, why don't we just allow you to have the opportunity to have a job, create more money, and you can participate ABC. And actually, if you have private companies that are providing such products such as healthcare, then by default, the fact that they're competing is obviously always better for the consumer. If you were to have a one medical system in this country and they had no competition, then you are going to wait 2 years before you can have a checkup. You are going to get the worst kind of medications. You know, if you don't have, just like government with the checks and balances, if you don't have competition within corporations or private companies, then the consumer is the person who loses out. I mean, that's the whole reason for having these antitrust laws. So I don't know what is sparking these socialists so much to have the attitude of gimme, 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 gimme without doing anything. But if so many young people are infested with this belief, which some people even characterize as a mental disorder, that would really be the fall of the country should they prevail in numbers. So let's just say you had the opportunity to, say, speak out against them at colleges, or let's take it one step higher. Let's just say hypothetical for a second. Let's say Dr. Corsi is the advisor to the president of the United States. What sort of advice would you be giving him to quell the socialists on a daily basis?
Well, I mean, first of all, the best curative to socialism is that people grow up or have to live under it. Either one. If people have to live under socialism, immediately hate it. And for these kids in school, I mean, I would fundamentally eliminate the tuition support. We don't need this many people going to college, and we could close half the colleges and do a lot to improve the entire educational system. It's like you could close 90% of the bureaucracy and have better government.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd probably not stop at 90%. That's probably a little low for me. But the point is, you know, we don't need bureaucrats. The bureaucrats just sit around and make regulations for everybody else. Let's impose term limits on the bureaucrats. You have to have been employed for 4 or 5 years, minimum 5 years in the private economy before you get to apply for a government job. Then you keep that job for a maximum of 4 to 6 years. 6 years, you've got to find something else to do.
Yes.
And the same thing we do in the schools. You can't get a student tuition. You have to pay for it. I'll say, but we want free. Well, it's not going to be free. If we want to be free, read this book, go to the library, take some tests. And so we could reduce the entire system, which is now based upon debts that nobody's going to pay back and kids that think that they're entitled. Now, when these kids get thrown out by their parents and have to face reality, I want to see, at 25, I'd expect most of them to think that Mao had a good idea. At 35, I'd be very surprised if the same percentage thought it. At 45 or 55, I'd be surprised if any of them think it at all, because they have had to go through enough life to know that their radical ideology isn't going to buy them a ham sandwich and a delicatessen.
No, it's not. It really isn't. And that's what blows my mind, that that more chapters have started to sprout in colleges. I didn't even know that there was a party within a party of the socialist Democrats. I mean, how could you even use the same two words together unless you go to the conclusion that Democrats don't even want a democracy, which is pretty much written in plain text all around us. But it was just recently, after I was contacted by Miss Cortez's camp, per se, to have her on the show, that I ended up clicking on her party's website. And I was flabbergasted to see that the Democrat Socialists of America actually had gone so far as to be a registered party. And then the fact that you have her being endorsed by so many other candidates, including Bernie Sanders, begs the question, will the establishment Democrats, who are communist right now and just Democrats by name, will they even go to socialism? But then again, you can sort of draw a comparison of communists and socialists and kind of say, what is the difference after all? Essentially, they want the same thing. Am I right?
Well, there's such little differences, it's kind of insignificant to me. The best antidote to socialism is reality. And, this entitlement mentality, you're not entitled to be disease-free all your life. You're not entitled to be a genius. You're not entitled to be accident-free. A lot of things you're not entitled to be.
Yes.
And the idea that they are entitled to, free education and free medical care and free this and free that is a lie that they've been taught in order to make them serfs. Now, these kids that you see being interviewed on college campuses who have spent all this time in education may know a lot about Hispanic studies and black studies and African studies and this studies and that studies, but they know fundamentally zero about any of the disciplines that are going to get them a gainful employment in their lives. And when mommy and daddy say, that's it, I'm pulling the plug, they're going to find hard reality isn't nearly as accommodating as their socialist communist professor was, and who taught them nothing. So this is I see this again, like I see the internet that we have today and all the social media as old last generation. I see what the universities are today as the dying throes of the university system in the United States of America. This is a completely bankrupt system. The idea you go sit in a classroom and somebody stands in front of it and lectures and then you do a test and you give them back what they said and you get graded is ridiculous.
It really is.
50 years from now, 50 years from now, this is going to be looked at as, why were people so stupid? I mean, you should be able to say, look, I want to learn X, Y, Z, and I want to challenge these courses, and I'll be able to go on the internet and access them myself. I want a little bit of ability to come in and get a instruction or some tutor to be able to assist me as I learn this material, to make sure I'm, thinking of it and mastering it correctly. But once I master this material, I want to come in and take a test, and then I want to be certified on that material. And I don't care if I do it in my living room in my pajamas with my computer, or I, do go to a classroom, but those who go to the classroom are going to be going to the expensive route, and one that 90% of people aren't going to choose. The system in Great Britain, the farther you go into education, the less you actually attend.
Yeah,
the more you do individual study and you design your own system and you design what you want to learn, and you're expected to master that. And you'll have finally to appear before those who have mastered it to prove that you qualify, and that's going to be done on the basis of what you're capable of producing. Now that system makes sense to me. That's the future. All these systems we got today are old. They're antique. They were designed in a horse and buggy age. They were designed by people who believed top-down structures work, who wanted authority and wanted, control and discipline. In a world of true internet, in a world of true access to education and information, the geniuses of the future may never attend a single day in a classroom.
That's right.
They may not attend a single day in formal school. Beethoven didn't say, I need to go to the fourth grade, I need to go to fifth grade, I need to go to sixth grade. Beethoven was Beethoven.
That's right.
He pursued it with Mozart. And lesser geniuses who decide that they're going to do medical careers in countries like Israel go into programs in universities where they're thrown into clinical experience right away, and they're expected to master the subjects, which may involve formal study, and it may involve individual study, depending on what they're capable of mastering. But there's no reason you have to sit in 8 years of elementary school when in kindergarten you knew how to read, write, and do arithmetic.
And one thing that's very key is people who think outside the box. You could go to a school, even if it's Stanford or Harvard, and you could do everything you're needed to do to get your degree. But if you only do that and there's nothing you really like about what you're doing, and say you're only, in school, I knew there was only two ways that you needed to get by. It wasn't until law school that I realized there's a whole third area. One, everything's either just math, or two, everything's regurgitation. You read it, you memorize it, and you spit it back on paper. Then I realized that there's a third area, which is logic. And if you basically have those three areas, you can get by through an economics major, arts major, essentially anything. But if you don't have anything that you're studying that you like, you're going to remember nothing. 6 months, 2 years, 5 years down the line, there always has to be that element of liking what you do, or you're going to end up in an industry where you put in the very least amount of work and are not the best employee, and then come home and dread going back to work the next day. So I think it's sort of key to enjoy what you do, then rather than just take a course or go to school and get a degree for the sake of it. Because if that was the case, you'd have a very, very unhappy populace.
Well, see, if you look at all these structures as old and outmoded, and you realize that we're in an age of tremendous change, at far faster rates than human beings can really comprehend as they're occurring. What is going on right now in the Democratic Party, what's going on in the internet right now with the censoring of people like Alex Jones, will, I think, in future generations be seen as some of the most stupid acts that have ever been taken, because all they did was promote Alex Jones. People who never heard of Alex Jones today are signing up to listen to his broadcasts.
That's right. That's what I was going to say. By putting it mainstream, they just made him popular.
Today, Alex Jones is realizing that his app is outselling the apps of all the major media and CNN. And so Alex Jones, with his app, people can listen to him directly, and that's become now enormously popular. That you don't need anything but the app, you can hear him.
And it's direct to each person. That's the greatest part about it.
At your time, when you want it. If you want to do it when you're, running, if you want to do it, when you're driving to work, if you want to do it on the train or the bus, you can listen at your own time in your own way and absorb the information. And it's there, and it's entertaining. And this is the death of the mainstream media, because it isn't entertaining. Boring. They're telling you what to think. And, Jim Acosta acting up is the equivalent in the mainstream media of Antifa. He's acting up. He's taking this press room, which should be a formal government setting with some respect, and he's making it his personal showroom to act up every day to make himself a little celebrity. Well, that's juvenile. That's amateur. That's childish. And, the future, when it looks back on Jim Acosta, is going to see him as a child who was immature and in a position he should not have been in. They're going to judge this period very harshly in the future in terms of the internet mastery of the Zuckerbergs who, probably when it comes right down to it, weren't smart enough to have invented Facebook to begin with, but they were delighted when Larry Ellison came along and said, "I'll let you be a billionaire, just front this company.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it well enough, I'll get somebody else to front the next one."
And it's looking that may happen. You see on the news that Zuckerberg may be kicked out. So you may have another CEO that toes the line.
Well, the guy to get is the guy at the top.
Yeah.
And that's where this top-down stops. And that's where the Corsi Nation is designed to say, we don't need a Larry Ellison at the top. We don't, if you take a look at what the challenge that blockchain has represented to traditional database management systems, which is a decentralization, and such that you can't have any authoritative source that says I'm the boss and I'm in charge, because that's not the way data is distributed. That's going to be revolutionary, and it's right at the very early stages. But all these databases that were based on SQL database and other structures that were largely invented, relational databases invented in the 40s and 50s by the early eras of computers by NSA, CIA, government-funded work, were brilliant in their time, but today are outmoded. They're not adapted to the era of supercomputers. They're not adapted to the era of kind of mathematical solutions that we're going to look for in decentralized systems to arrive at truth or advancements or any other thing that's going to be important to human beings. These centralized down systems are going to be looked at as slavery, and what they produce is kids in school who mouth socialism, don't really know what it means.
Nope.
Can't tell you anything about history, can't tell you anything about science, can't add, can't spell, can't write, but get a degree because they've been, properly acculturated to be, the mindless serfs that the deep state wants them to be. My whole book, Killing the Deep State, is meant to kill the deep state. That this entire structure, this bureaucracy that thinks it's superior and in charge, has come to an end. It's not done yet because it hasn't died the death of old age and being outmoded, but it is dead. and it's no longer needed. 25,000 regulations to how to turn in a light bulb is not only stupid, but it's of an era where people felt they needed that kind of guidance to do it right. In the future, nobody's going to look to a bureaucrat to know what they should do.
When I went to Europe the last time, I went with a woman I was dating. We went to use one of those petty boats in the canals of Amsterdam. All we had to do was pay the guy the money, and he said, we'll be back in an hour. Meet us back there in an hour. And so we're sitting there, or not sitting there, we're in the water on this petty boat, and we're literally dodging these fairly large fishing boats. We're almost at the dam that would let us in sea. We're lost. And at the same time, we realized, wow, this would never happen in America. If we were to do this in America, we would sign a waiver and a whole bunch of other things. And aside from a contract, a waiver that we wouldn't sue them, we'd have to wear a life vest, we'd have to wear a helmet, and we'd basically be babied and be told, okay, you have to stay within this 50 by 50 square of water. And if you leave it, they're going to blow the whistle or come out there and yank you off your little petty boats. And, if they're not holding your hands on what you're doing, then it's not going to happen. And so when I saw the dichotomy of the freedom they have in just that one small activity, that is when it came to me of how large of a scale the United States of America wants to baby you. And the people that vote to put those in power, those bureaucrats who need to be babied, begs the question, do they have any sense of mind? Do they have any sense of anything that resembles freedom when they can't do anything without asking the person at the top if they can? And if they are allowed, they're allowed very limited space that is controlled. And so to me, that was the biggest wake-up call. Was there anything in your life prior to President Trump coming on the scene that made you realize that the bureaucracy here in the United States is so far off that they're trying to take over everything we see, hear, eat, smell, everything we do, to the point of us being robots and slaves?
Well, kind of unusual to ask that question because when I was a child and my mother took me to school, so I'm going to go, brought me to kindergarten. I stayed for a couple hours and I left. And I refused to go to school. That was a major problem. I would not go to school. I said, I'm not doing it. And they wanted to put me in special schools. My mother wouldn't permit it. So we had a very contentious relationship through my growing up. And the farther I went in school, the less I attended. So I've been this way since I was born.
Good. We need more people like you.
I've always seen these systems as completely antiquated and completely ridiculous, and felt that the only reason I was being forced to go through them was because human beings at this point were not really as advanced as human beings are going to become. And, we're right at the edge of people abandoning all these systems of top-down control, including Larry Ellison and Oracle and all the other Luciferians. We're going to abandon this Luciferian mentality that we should be serfs and slaves, and again, life is evil and nasty, and we ought to worship the devil. And we're going to begin to see a higher nature and to work into systems that foster growth and foster human development and allow us to create what could be a future that's going to be much more enriching to live in. But it's not going to have anything to do with, I guarantee you, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. I agree with that. I believe we are on the verge of the Great Awakening. And it's obvious from people who are reading your book, who hear you on this show, on Alex Jones, and so many of these alternate mainstream media sites or stations or anything like that. I mean, the rise of YouTube, for instance, has so many different shows, for instance, people that are literally, their studio looks like it'd be straight up from Fox News almost, but they're getting millions and millions upon people who are tuning to them daily because they're going straight to that person. But then on the other side, you have to worry about now this censorship. As I mentioned, I was even censored for putting up that Hilary Clinton election night, her celebrating, and even talking about her being sick in 2016. I was actually blown away with that. But at the same time, like you said, people are starting to become aware. I would think people are getting angry enough. And of course, the mainstream media only shows it when you have, say, the people who support our president outnumbered by the people who don't support the president. If there's violent acts that are perpetuated by anybody who supports the president, it's going to be on every channel at the top of the hour, every hour. If you have it from the other side, say the liberals, the communists, the socialists, you don't hear about it unless you were a witness to it. And again, that goes to show that the mainstream news follows them. Now, real quick, because we're coming down to the end of the show, I'm going to basically give a statement or two, try to wrap up the idea of what I've come through your book. And please correct any statement that I have that's wrong or add in anything that you want. Now, everybody listening, you must read Killing the Deep State. I implore you to read it to really understand what is happening around us. So in essence, by paying attention to the media, not the mainstream media, but what's been happening, and of course, reading Killing the Deep State, essentially this is what I've sort of put together. And like I said, Killing the Deep State does a fantastic job of doing so. So you have Hilary Clinton running for president. She almost needs to get in because of all the promises she's made to the big banks and the terrorist nations and so on and so forth. So in 2016, you have the DNC goes and hires Fusion GPS to compile anything bad they can about the Republican frontrunner Donald Trump. They also need to get somebody in the intelligence community to confirm those facts or so-called facts in order to get a FISA warrant. A FISA warrant comes from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is essentially a covert court. You don't have the rights that are given to you by the Fourth Amendment or any amendment in that matter. There's no defense. If you are a subject of a FISA surveillance, you would never even know that there was a warrant that had gone to somebody went to a judge to testify about you. This was all done covertly. No defense is allowed. So they find Christopher Steele, a former FBI rat, disgraced MI6 agent, and they paid him $50,000 by Lisa Page. Peter Strzok was paid to Christopher Steele so he can confirm the so-called facts, what is now known as the Steele dossier. Now that essentially put a warrant, not a warrant. Yeah. They actually started surveilling Carter Page, who was part of Trump's campaign at the time. And through that, that's where essentially they learning all the facts that, of course, Mueller wants to use right now as the insurance policy, as I said, for Hillary, to make sure that Trump spends as little time in the office as possible. But you do have some breakdowns in the system. For instance, you have that Russia meddling. But we also do know from WikiLeaks that the CIA has hacking programs. Particularly the one that I came across is Umbra, U-M-B-R-A, which allows you to leave a digital fingerprint on any nation or their intelligence services and so on. So when you hear on the news that there is intelligence or Russia meddling into our elections, the only people who meddled with our elections is the U.S., the DNC, Hillary, and anybody that wanted her in power, along with the UK and their intelligence services. Would you say, Dr. Corsi, that encompasses the idea of what our president is facing right now?
Yes, I think I'd add to it that this is coming to an end, that Mueller is about done. And the next phase of this is going to be a counterattack that Donald Trump is going to launch, probably take the rest of this term. and these criminals will be brought to justice. In the second term, Donald Trump, I think, will do military tribunals and will bring Hilary Clinton and Barack Obama, others like John Brennan, to task for treason. And I think Donald Trump is capable of doing this. And, I pray to God he has a chance to stay safe, stay alive, and continue with his remarkable presidency the way he has been.
And I'm glad you mentioned the fact of staying safe, because recently there was a plot to assassinate him that was thwarted, which is a good thing in the sense that he has to worry that I believe the deep state wants him out of there so badly. I don't think it's beneath them to essentially assassinate him and have some sort of patsy that they lay it off on. Let me ask you about Julian Assange real quick. If I was President Trump in particular, where WikiLeaks can be seen as the organization that's been releasing the information that the people of the nations, of all the nations of this world, should have access to. And you could say in some ways it's helping the awareness of people. Would you pardon Julian Assange and offer him citizenship in the United States, or would you allow the Ecuadorians to revoke his ability to live at the embassy, which in other terms would put him on the streets of London and probably arrest him and try him for whatever crimes they come up with? So what would you do to Julian Assange?
Oh, I'd definitely pardon him. And I think he is a journalist under, the Pentagon Papers case, the New York Times v. USA, a Supreme Court case, 1971. He had the right to publish even classified material that was stolen as long as he didn't steal it.
Yes.
And I think he should be rewarded and viewed as a hero. I'd like to see him brought here, and he would be the one, I think, who could prove that it was Seth Rich, not the Russians, who stole the emails from the DNC and gave them to WikiLeaks.
Wasn't one of the reasons that the emails were found was because of Huma Abedin and her so-called, or her husband? Weren't some of the emails found on his laptop because his wife was Hillary's number one during her campaign, aside from John Podesta?
Well, yes, Hillary let Huma send these State Department classified emails to her Yahoo account, yahoo.com, Huma Abedin at yahoo.com, where they could be read by anybody she gave or sold the passport and the username to. I mean, I'm convinced Hillary's email system was created so foreign actors could read it, see all the things they were getting, the pay for play, and get intelligence information. I think Hillary was trying to monetize everything she did, and her emails were just one aspect of that.
That's a great way to put it, because I think the Clinton Foundation has their hands in so many pies, so many ways to make money, that it's actually a very sick thing. And then when you throw an Epstein to the mix, which that's a whole nother show on that matter, you just realize that the corruption from the Clinton Foundation is deeply rooted in so many institutions and people in the U.S. and abroad, that it is really very scary. That I think when the ball drops, I think we're going to see a lot more people, like you said, that Trump will send into military tribunals and through the courts into indictments. Far more people whose names that we may not be talking about right now, that we may not even know are involved. That I like I said, I just hope it's one day we wake up and we no longer have to worry about censorship or anything like that, because the swamp will be drained and those responsible for putting us in such a position will pay the ultimate price.
Well, I think it's coming. I think we're finding that, and hopefully shows like this will help get the word out, and people will begin waking up and thinking. And I think that's inevitable, and I'm glad to see we're advancing the curve here to get people to wake up.
Yes, yes. Now, since we are almost out of time, I do want to talk about, again, for those who may have joined in late or may have taken a little longer during their break, to talk about what you're doing now, what you're going to be doing, for instance, Corsi Nation, any upcoming shows. Let's plug in everything right now. I do know people can find you at Infowars.com. You already set up CorsiNation.com, right?
Yes, CorsiNation.com. And it's up and running, and I think people should really take a look at it because it is a citizen journalism. You'll be able to submit memes to it, articles, comments, forums, got a lot of activity where you can participate. And I think it's been out now for less than a month, but we've got very, very strong. I'm doing live streams every day on YouTube and other places, but what I'm getting is up to 20,000 people after only 3 weeks that are watching every one of my videos. And the videos are on CorsiNation.com. They're live streamed and archived, and they're on YouTube, my channel, JRLCORSI. Please look at me at PayPal. Any contributions are really appreciated. And it's Jerome Corsi, CORSI, at PayPal. And you can access that through my email, jrlc@yahoo.com. These are very important. They keep us going because, we're constantly struggling out here for funding, and this is one way to keep going.
And of course, we're going to post everything that you mentioned on the site. A lot of your articles, I post hot links on this site because you've written a lot of great articles, and your other books that are that people can just search your name at Amazon or click on the book section of my site. You also have, I see, Unfit for Command, Swift Boats Veterans Speak Out Against John Kerry, co-authored with John O'Neill, and the Obama Nation, Leftist Politics and the Cult of Personality. Let's talk about some other books.
Oh, I've written 30 books since 2004, and many subjects, including on atomic Iran, and I've been following that for a long time, since 2005. And it's really been a great pleasure to be with you tonight. I want to thank you, and we hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. Dr. Corsi, if you could just hang by for one quick second to wrap up the show. Everybody, make sure you go to those websites. Make sure you do read Killing the Deep State, along with the plethora of great articles. And like you heard Dr. Corsi say, 30 books. Also, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. Once this show makes its way to all the other networks, it'll play in the United Kingdom at Pulse Talk Radio Network, Deprogram Talk Radio Network, and of course here in the US, PSN, and also we have Paranormal King, and of course you're listening live right now on Late Night in the Midlands. Remember, folks, the only thing you have to remember is the name of the show. That is Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live. That is the website, drjradiolive.com. All social media from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, YouTube, Google, you name it, is one word, DRJ Radio Live. With that being said, I, Dr. J, am officially signing off. Carol. There we go. Corsi, thank you so much. I kept it a little extra to plug in as much as we can about you. I've been getting a lot of comments throughout the show. You were definitely loved because I usually don't take sides too much in the sense if it comes to politics. If Dukakis is on, as much as I want to ream him for the liberal talk, I sort of let him speak and then let the people afterwards talk to him and talk about